how do you draw rivers? That's what I'm going to be looking at today. And that might seem like a silly question because don't you just draw rivers like that? Or maybe if you're feeling fancy with 2 lines? Well, yes and no. Remember, this isn't a river. This is a representation of a river. And that's a crucial distinction. When you're drawing rivers, rivers tell you a lot about your geography. And there's a certain logic to them that you have to follow. So just being able to draw a line or 2 parallel lines, it doesn't mean you can draw a river. You have to understand how they work and how they fit into the logic of your larger continent. So for example, let's look at this continent that I worked on last time. Some really important things to know. I've written down some notes here, but you may not be able to read them. Rivers do not split. Rivers are water. Water follows gravity. Water goes downhill. So you have to start somewhere high and you end somewhere low. The vast majority of the time, this means that you start up in mountains or in hills and you end up at the ocean. That's a very important point to remember. I see a lot of people making rivers that flow from one ocean to another ocean, or flow from one river to another river that's flowing uphill back to a mountain, or things like that. It's important to keep track of where your rivers are starting and where they're going. What direction are they moving, and why are they moving in that direction? That's critical. So a river may start, let's say it starts up here in this mountain range, and then we can do what we please with it. It's going downhill towards the ocean. Let's say it hits the ocean there. It's fine. It's a perfectly fine river. Remember, rivers do not split. The reason for this is that as they're going downhill, there is always one direction that's lower than another direction. There's no way a river could get to an area where it would be in a trough that would split off in 2 directions that were both equally low with like some sort of ridge in between them that was dividing them. I suppose that might in theory be possible, but in practice it doesn't happen. Look around the world or on normal maps of the actual world for maps of rivers. You won't see rivers splitting. They converge though. That's very common. You will find 2 rivers traveling through the lowest regions of land, flowing downhill, will often converge at a point that's lower than either of them, right? And then they will merge together into one river and continue on. And the rivers grow and grow and grow. So in this sense, rivers have a kind of fractal pattern. As they converge, they get bigger and bigger, but the smaller rivers that are converging into bigger rivers are also built out of smaller and smaller rivers. So I might have this fairly large river going out to the sea here, but it is built out of other rivers that were flowing all by themselves, la-di-da-di-da, but they were flowing downhill. This river is following the lowest point, and so that makes sense that this would also flow towards that point as well, because it's lower, and eventually they converge. Same thing up here, you might have a river flowing down, and again, it's heading towards this low point that's all these rivers are gravitating towards. At the same time, you can find this river is built out of smaller rivers, right? These rivers are built out of smaller rivers, etc. There's this branching fractal pattern that just goes down and down and down. You'll see this if you look at real river and stream systems, is that they continue to branch fractally down to a very low level until they're just tiny little streams, etc. Now, an interesting thing is that, as I've said, rivers follow the path of least resistance. They go downhill to the lowest point and then continue to flow in that way until they reach the lowest point, which is usually sea level. What that means is that where you draw your rivers doesn't just tell you information about your rivers, it tells you information about your geography. It tells the person viewing the map that these rivers are at a low point, that there's a kind of valley here, that this is a lower point in the geography of your landscape. If you have a lot of rivers flowing and converging, say in this direction, right, towards this is another mountain range over here, then this tells you that this is kind of like a long valley between 2 mountain ranges. That just tells you that just because that's where the rivers are. That's where the rivers are going to go to. So you can tell your viewer or your map observer, anyone looking at your map, a lot about your geography by where you put your maps. Now, depending on the scale of your map, you don't have to draw in every single fractal little branch of your map. river. Sorry, I often don't. But if you're more zoomed in, you definitely do want to add that. It's often it's a common misunderstanding that there's only like large rivers flowing out of mountain ranges. But there's a great map online. I'll see if I can find a link to it that shows you every stream and river in America, just the streams and rivers. Like it leaves out all the other landmarks. And the whole country is like this dense blue web of little lines, all slowly converging into larger lines and into larger lines and into larger lines, flowing towards the lowest points and then out to the sea. It's extremely dense. So that's what you're going to see in real life. You're going to see water not only coming from mountain ranges, but it's also going to come from hills. It's also going to come from springs that just bubbles up from groundwater. You're going to see that happening too, even in relatively low places. So you may have springs just sort of bubbling up from here. And again, they're trying to seek out the lowest place, and this river has already found the lowest place, and they kind of head in that direction. Now, just as having your streams and rivers converge into one larger river in one direction tells you that that's kind of a riverbed or a low point, maybe like a shallow valley heading out in that direction. Putting rivers near each other but not touching tells you about the area in between them. So this is another mountain range. Put some mountains here. The biggest rivers do tend to come from mountain ranges because it's mostly snow melt melting off and flowing downhill. So let's say you have a river going off in this direction. Then you have another river. Oh, and what's going on here? It's flowing off in this direction. What does that tell you? Why aren't they converging? This is kind of must be a low point, right? There must be sloping downhill there. But this also must be sloping downhill there in order for the river to go in that direction. And that kind of consequently tells you that there's probably a high area in between, causing there to be this sort of these two low areas. So that's some information that kind of you just naturally pull out of having two rivers near each other like that. For this reason, you tend not to see rivers flow near each other for long periods of time. That's very unusual that there would just be like this long ridge dividing them. Inevitably, if you have two streams near each other, they're almost certainly going to converge with each other. Right, so you wouldn't see something like this, where you would have this long stream and then another long stream going like that. Right, unless there is somehow a long string of hills keeping them apart, they're just going to pull together into one another. It's just going to happen just by gravity. So, things to look for. Rivers tell you where your valleys are. Rivers always flow downhill from high points to low points. Rivers form networks, dense fractal networks of rivers, streams, and then like little brooks, going all the way down to a very low level. You're going to see springs coming out of even relatively low land, so they don't have to start from mountains. They can start relatively low and then build up into streams. You're going to see ridges or high points in between two rivers that are close to one another. And most of all, rivers do not split. Do not have a river going like this and then going like that, right? If it's following the lowest point, it's only going to go in one direction. This is a mistake that I myself made on one of my earlier maps. You can probably go back and find it. Since then, I've tried to avoid doing that. Following those techniques, you can't go too wrong. Your maps will look more realistic. Your rivers will look more realistic. And in general, I advise adding more streams and rivers than you might expect. Don't just add big rivers, add more of a dense network of streams as well. I think it'll look better, it'll look more realistic. It also adds more texture to your map and more interest. That's it for my advice for this video. Come back next time when I'll talk a little bit about lakes and how that relates to rivers. They're closely tied together. Thanks for watching. Like and subscribe and add a comment down below. And I'll see you again later. Thanks for watching.